Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Morning Bible. It is Luke chapter 12 time. You know what it is, you know what time it is. It's the morning, reading the Bible. It's the Morning Bible. That should be my new intro. We shall see about that. Alright, today's passage follows on really nicely from yesterday's one. Yesterday's one was telling us the parable of the rich fool, where Jesus is addressing this guy who's sort of arguing with his brother about inheritance. Jesus addresses this guy and says, look, there was the story of a rich man who stored up loads and loads of grain. He got loads of grain, he was really wealthy, he put it all in these storehouses, but he still had more grain, so he built bigger storehouses, and then he was like, alright, sick, I'm going to just spend the rest of my life eating, drinking and being merry and just sort of taking the easy road and enjoying myself. And then God steps in and he's like, actually no, I'm going to take your soul today. And so all of this grain this guy had stored up was for nothing. It was all just kind of sat in these houses. Who did it belong to? What purpose did it serve? Nothing. And so God is saying, look, Jesus is saying you need to put your stock in something greater than that. You need to put your stock in God. And so this next passage sort of follows on, but looks at it from a different angle, and is one that I quote all the time to people because I think it's really, really powerful and really useful. So Luke 12 from verse 22 all the way up to 34. So this might be a bit of a longer video today, so apologies for that in advance. Actually, no, not apologies. You're reading the Bible, it's a good thing. Verse 22, and he said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, and yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of those. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today, and tomorrow is thrown in the oven, how much more will he clothe you? O you of little faith! And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." So, brilliant passage. There's so much in there. There's loads to unpack. Jesus sort of goes through several different metaphors. And so we'll just sort of do it chunk by chunk. But one of the most beautiful things about this passage is actually how clear it is. So hopefully I won't sort of natter on about it too long or get too excited talking about it, because it's so plain, it's so simple. You know, I can't phrase this better than the passage says, but let's look at it anyway. First little chunk, Jesus says, he turns to his disciples for this passage. So the previous one was addressed to the guy who was arguing with his brother, and Jesus gave him the parable of the rich fool. But now Jesus turns to his disciples to say this. And the reason why he turns to his disciples is because his disciples have already accepted him and are following his ways. And so this is a message specifically for Jesus' followers. He says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing." So it's quite a sort of broad introduction to what he's going to say. He sort of hits the main points, but doesn't do it too specifically. He just says, don't be anxious, essentially. But specifically he's saying, don't be anxious about worldly things. Don't be anxious about what you're going to eat and what you're going to wear. Those things will be provided for you. He's saying life is more than food and the body is more than clothing. So if you make your life about eating, then you're diminishing in it. And if you make your body just about clothing and appearances, about how it looks, then you're diminishing that also. Because both things have been designed for a much greater purpose than just the material things that you tack onto them. Then we get the first little parable that Jesus gives us, not parable, more of a metaphor really. He says, "Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds?" So you remember the passage we looked at the other day where I said you're worth more than a sparrow? Is where Jesus is talking. I think it's actually not that long ago. It's earlier in chapter 12 where Jesus says, "Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies, and not one of them is forgotten before God? Fear not, you are of more value than many sparrows." So he's saying the same thing here. He's saying, you're of more value than ravens. Obviously, you just have to look around to see that a human is worth so much more than a raven. And yet a raven doesn't have storehouses. It doesn't, have barns. It doesn't have all these stores of food for itself. It just eats on a day-by-day basis, and God provides on that day-by-day basis. So this is actually quite a big challenge for us. It's saying, don't spend all your time saving stuff up and preparing for the future and putting all your grain in barns, because God provides it on a daily basis. You don't need all of that stuff stored up, because you can trust that God is going to give to you. And sometimes that trust can be quite a scary thing. It can take a big step out in faith to be able to put your trust in God like that, but know that He will provide. There will be a meal for you, there will be clothing for you, there will be something for you. You just have to, trust in God and trust that He will provide that for you. And then he goes on to say the next little bit, which is, "And which of you by being anxious can add a single hour to the span of his life? If you are not able to do a thing as small as that, why are you anxious about the rest?" So again, this is a big challenge. We don't know when we're going to die, but if you just sit here and worry about dying, then you're not going to live any longer. If anything, you're wasting your life worrying without actually having any gain at the end of it. If anything, you're losing time by doing that. So Jesus is saying, look, if you can't add just 1 hour to your life from worrying, then what's the point of worrying about all these small things? Because all these small things aren't going to, matter at the end of the day, are they? It's another very simple but very direct challenge that goes right to the heart of especially our culture today. Then we get our next little metaphor that he gives us. He says, "Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. If God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will He clothe you?" So this next little passage is about lilies. It compares them to Solomon. So who's Solomon? Well, Solomon was the son of King David. We've talked about King David a few times. He's from the David and Goliath story. He goes on to become the king of Israel. He writes loads of psalms, loads of poetry about God, about his relationship with God, worshipping God, but also about the difficult times he faced with God. And Solomon was David's son, and Solomon was wise. He wrote a lot of the wisdom books of the Bible, or at least he was involved with the writing of a lot of the wisdom books of the Bible. The wisdom books means Proverbs, Song of Songs, and why is my mind going blank? Ecclesiastes. There we go. And so those were books just about just wisdom about how to live your life, how to do these things. But one of the things about Solomon was that he was he was a good-looking guy, and he had huge amounts of wealth. He had vast amounts of wealth. It says that God provided so many things for him, and at the end some of these things ended up being his downfall. His relationship with women was sort of the key in that, where that was one of the things where sin crept into his life. But he had all of the wealth, all of the clothes, all of the materials, all of the fabrics, whatever that you could ever possibly want, and so he was beautifully well dressed. And the passage here is saying, "Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." So arrayed, it means well dressed, essentially. He wasn't dressed like one of these. So even Solomon, with all of that wealth, didn't look as good as one of these lilies. And this lily has never worked on its appearance in its life. This lily just is. It just looks like that. And so the passage then says very simply, it's look, these lilies are like grass, essentially. They're grown one day, they're thrown in the oven the next day. They're so temporary, they mean nothing. They mean something, but they're, in comparison to people, they mean very little when a person means this much. So if a person means this much, then, compare that to a lily. It's quite simple, really. And so that's sort of talking about, in the first bit where it talked about do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, or your body, about what you'll put on. This is talking about that next bit of your body, what you will put on. God is saying, look, you don't need to adorn yourself and all these fancy things to look a certain way, because God has made you to look a certain way. It says, "Oh, you have little faith, and do not seek what you are to eat or what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you." So, that's like Jesus is not fully rebuking his disciples here, but he's being like, look, wake up. Like, God knows you need this stuff. God knows you need to eat and you need clothes. He created you. He knows that you need this stuff, and so he'll provide for you. If you're seeking his kingdom, then God's not going to be like, oh, well, this person can't seek the kingdom today because they haven't been seeking food enough, and so, they're going to have to go hungry or whatever. God's going to be like, no, if you're seeking my kingdom, then I'm going to, put things going right in your life. I'm going to give you the food, I'm going to give you the clothes, I'm going to, make your paths straight, make things easy for you, so that you can continue to seek my kingdom, so you can continue to seek my purpose. It's really simple when you think about it. If you had let's say you're the boss at work and you've got an employee who's working flat out and he's like, look, I need lunch, but I just can't go and get lunch. You'd be like, oh yeah, of course, I'll get you something. And then you pop out on your lunch break and you just bring in food and put food on your desk and you're like, there you go. Because, it's not quite the same analogy, but you know what I mean? It's so simple when you think about it. Of course God's going to provide for you. And when that's just an employer looking after his employee, think about the amount of love that God has for you. Of course he's going to provide for you. Of course he's going to provide for you. And this last little bit is absolutely beautiful. It's a really gentle little end to the passage. Jesus says, "Fear not, little flock." He calls us a little flock. We're vulnerable, we're small in comparison to him, but there's a beauty and a purity and something special about Jesus' little flock. He says, "For it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." That's what I was just saying. He isn't just an employer feeding an employee, he's a father feeding his son. It's something that brings you great pleasure. Something that makes you happy to be able to provide for someone, to be able to welcome you into the kingdom. And the instructions we get are simple. It says, sell your possessions and give to the needy. Don't have this big barn full of all this grain. Don't have all these clothes ready for you to wear. Just get rid of those, sell those, and give them to something else. Give them to someone who needs them, and give them to someone who doesn't have enough. Maybe that will be God working through you to provide for that person. Maybe that's what that looks like in this instance. Provide yourself with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in heaven that does not fail, where no thief approaches, no moth destroys. So that's a guarantee that Jesus is giving us. Look, if you put your treasure in the kingdom, then those money bags won't grow old, they won't sort of start falling apart, there won't be a moth eating away at this stuff, there won't be a thief taking it. Those things can sit there and they will not age, they will not spoil over time. They are eternal and they are good. And Jesus says, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So this is a very simple, again, direct way of ending this passage, saying, look, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What are the things you treasure? Because chances are those are going to be the things that your heart is longing after. So make sure it's something good, make sure it's something that lasts. Really, really good passage. I love that passage so much. I'm glad that I got to read that one today. It speaks into our time so much, into my life especially. Looking at next year and sort of the uncertainty of what's coming, knowing that I'm provided for is such a comfort. Cool. I hope you all have a good day. What day is it? It'll be Friday when you're watching this. So yeah, I hope it's a good end to your work week and you can start to relax and have a nice weekend. And the weather, hopefully, fingers crossed, will stay good. I'll see you all later. Much love. Bye bye bye.